Welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Do say from where you're joining us today in the chat. Before I introduce myself, I just wanted to say that there is a live interpretation into Arabic for this webinar. لمتابعة الندوة بالعربية اضغطوا على زر أو علامة الترجمة Interpretation على شكل كوكب في أسفل الشاشة. المرجو اختيار القناة العربية. يمكنكم كذلك طرح الأسئلة بالعربية وسنوصلها للمتدخلين والمتدخلات. My name is Hamza Hamouchan. I'm a London-based Algerian researcher and activist and the North Africa Program Coordinator at the Transnational Institute. I will be facilitating this discussion with Miriam Aura, a Dutch-Moroccan scholar activist and a reader at Westminster University in the UK. We have a team helping us to run this webinar. Jess, who will be taking care of the logistics and the technical side. Maha from the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, who will be collecting a few questions from you. Riwan, who will be monitoring the chat and posting relevant links. And Yorit, who will be recording the webinar in Arabic. And we also have Muhammad and Bilal, who will be doing the interpretation. The webinar is co-organized by the Transnational Institute, the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation North Africa office, and the Contemporary Marxism Research Group. TNI is an international research and advocacy institute committed to building a just, democratic, and sustainable planet. For more than 40 years, it has served as a unique nexus between social movements, engaged scholars, and policy makers. TNI has been organizing a lot of amazing webinars with great speakers since April 1st last year. And as you can imagine, this comes at a cost. So any support you can help us with to continue doing that work will be much appreciated. The North African office of the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, the German foundation Rosa Luxemburg, was established in July 2013 in Tunis and strives for the promotion of innovative and creative initiatives in the region to support social justice, bottom-up political participation, and cross-societal dialogue. The Contemporary Marxism Research Group is a network of scholars at King's College London, the London School of Economics, Queen Mary University, and from the rest of the UK and abroad. They've been organizing a great series of seminars, inviting excellent scholars and activists. Today's webinar is part of a series that we started organizing from the beginning of the year, focusing on various countries and themes. We had the first one in February around Egypt and Tunisia, the second one in April on Syria, Libya, Yemen, and Bahrain. Both were very successful in terms of attendance and engagement. The focus today would be Algeria, Morocco, Sudan, and Western Sahara. We have around 500 registrations. We show the big interest in the series of webinars. This is part of a multimedia project that will reflect on a decade of struggles in the Arab region since 2010-2011. Our objective is to challenge some of the misconceptions and debunk the racist and contemptuous stereotypes about the region. Ultimately, we would like to capture the spirit of the revolutions, their creative energy, as well as their contradictions, shortcomings, and the enemies surrounding them. Basically, we want to look back, take stock in order to look forward. We will try to do this through webinars, podcasts, and a dossier of articles, essays that will come out in the autumn. Before I let Miriam give a brief context for today's webinar, I just wanted to let you know that you can share relevant links and material in the chat. And if you want to ask questions, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom window to make Maha's life much easier. Over to you, Miriam.
Hi, I'm unmuted. You can hear me. All fine. Okay, for those of you who are not familiar with the format of our webinars, we usually have a kind of conversation style part in the discussion, and then we kind of flow over into the Q&A. And we start usually with asking all our speakers to sort of give a brief introduction around the sort of basic questions to do with the regions or countries we've asked them to reflect on. So there will be kind of opening remarks of about 7 minutes each before we continue. So what is the background of today's webinar? Officially the last, the third in the trilogy, if you would like. So today's webinar clearly is sort of shaped around the question of temporality. That's why we also wanted to bring in speakers to tell us a bit about what are supposedly or considered the second wave uprisings. We have seen from the first and the second webinar that uprisings are at those moments, those revolutionary moments where a kind of collective self-transformation occurs, and that those are moments that ordinary people experience their capacities in ways that they haven't had the chance to before, but also in that process that they build new forms of solidarity with each other. And also in that process of building new solidarities, maybe also fashion new identities and self-references. And we have discussed revolutions in the last webinar as also pertaining a process which has very different outcomes or which can include counter-revolutions. And today the speakers will actually remind us of the crucial reference points of revolutions as a situation in and of itself, but these are also situations that have a certain duration, a certain rhythm. And we consider these rhythms waves. So that's why we refer to them as the second wave. And in some conditions and situations, these sort of revolutionary conjunctures are marked by revolutionary transgression that have to be repeated, right? Time and again, 2 steps forwards, 1 step back. And this is also why we really like the title Revolutionary Rehearsals. And we are really proud to also say that this is a title also from the book Revolutionary Rehearsals, which has been prepared actually decades ago, the first volume by the late Colin Barker, but has recently also been published by the sort of republished work of Colin Barker, but with, unfortunately, very sadly, currently also the late Neil Davidson, and also edited by Gareth Dale. And we will put the link to the book and an important meeting that our comrades at Spectre are organizing about revolutionary rehearsals in the chat. This meeting, this launch of the book organized by Spectre will also include speakers like Adam Hania, who is himself part of our project in the sense that he is writing also a piece for our written publications. So these revolutionary transformations, we really want to hear from our speakers anecdotes and stories about how they are not just ideas that are postponed to the future, but they are actually the praxis itself, the performance, the performative rehearsal of transgressions in the current present. So this is why we also want to talk with our guests today about what people are experiencing on the ground rather than only the theoretical analysis. So the mass uprisings that we are discussing today, whether it's the Western Sahara, Algeria, Sudan, or Morocco, are not per se perfect or socialist revolutions, but they are very important stages in revolutionary change. And I think it's very important for us to listen also very carefully to what our speakers have to say, because it is maybe not a surprise for many, but it is important to also remind that many of these countries are actually not that often discussed and debated in the outside world when we talk about the Arab Revolution. So I think it's an important suggestion of us to create space to also talk with people from the Western Sahara and to bring them together with people from Morocco and Algeria, which is, I think, a unicum for any webinar. So before I give the floor to the first 2 speakers, we would like to continue what we've done in the first 2 webinars, and which has been very successful, namely to show you a visual video montage about some of these uprisings we're talking about. And in the first 2 webinars, we've seen that it really touches us. Goosebumps, comes back, brings back memories, and really sort of sets the stage. And I'm also very curious, I haven't seen it myself yet, so we will first watch videos from the Moroccan and Sudanese uprisings.
Very powerful moments indeed. I'm delighted now to introduce Miriam and Sara. Miriam Mabrouk is a Moroccan activist and translator. She is a PhD candidate in politics at Birkbeck, University of London. Her main areas of interest are international historical sociology and Marxist theories of international relations, state formation, and the debate on the origins of capitalism in the Maghreb. Sara Abbas is a Sudanese activist, feminist, and political scientist. She is a PhD candidate at the Freie Universität Berlin. Some of her recent writings include the essay, My Feminism Will Always Be Unfinished, published for Rosa Luxemburg Foundation in 2019, and a chapter co-written with Azza Mustafa in A Region in Revolt, mapping the recent uprisings in North Africa and West Asia, a book co-published by TNI and Daraja Press. I also co-wrote a chapter on Algeria in it, so do get a copy from our bookstore. My colleagues will be posting a link in the chat right now. Miriam and Sara, you have 7 minutes each for your opening remarks, and I will make this sign when you have 1 minute to wrap up. Miriam?
Hi, can everyone hear me? Thanks very much for having us here today. So I'm going to attempt to speak a little bit about the movement of the Reef and the 20th February movement, but it's not going to be comprehensive considering I have 7 minutes, so it's quite the challenge. So just to give a very brief political overview, we've seen how the Moroccan monarchy for decades focused on containing and weakening different political struggles, starting out with radicals in the nationalist movement and the Marxist left with groupings such as Il Al-Amam or To the Front, where many comrades were imprisoned, tortured, or murdered. We have the case of Saïda Mnabhij, Bihar Hal, Abraham Serfati. And then we also have a situation of NGOs in the left, basically, where the Moroccan state aims to contain liberals in these pseudo-democratic institutions. But in spite of that, we've seen periodic intifadas in 1952, in 1981, in 1984, amongst many, many others. So it's in this context that the 20th February movement was a shift of the paradigm of struggle, encouraged by the revolutionary effervescence of the Maghreb and the wider region in demand for liberation, social and historic justice, as well as dignity. So it's a movement with a revolutionary global backdrop from the outset, but a concrete manifestation of socio-political forces which reproduce informal economies, inadequate housing, slums, and see the increased privatization of public property, which in turn makes cities uninhabitable. But it's of course very, very important to note that this movement didn't start from scratch. It was an accumulation of at least 2 decades of working class, popular, and labor militancy. And those include the struggles of the unemployed movement, the struggle of the coordination committee against high prices, or تنسيقيات مناهضة الغلاء, and the struggle of populations in areas that have experienced a long history of marginalization, including places like Safro, Sidi Ifni, Tata, and so on. Alongside socio-political struggles for healthcare and education. So for nearly a year, the 20th February movement organized mass rallies to overthrow corruption and tyranny. And it was calling for a sovereignty of the people, or SHEB, through a democratic constitution. The movement also called for abolishing or dissolving parliament, and a government that takes people's aspirations for liberation seriously. And much like its Algerian counterpart of the much later on Uprising, it also called for abolishing every single symbol of corruption at every level, starting from political to economic life. But most importantly, it also called for the equal distribution of wealth. So just to clarify, the movement was not a political party. It didn't aim to form one. It didn't have an official leadership in that sense, but it did have coordination in the form of a General Assembly and various neighborhood committees. So in terms of the actors involved in the movement, there's a whole wide range. Connections between cyber activists, community activists, the radical left, Islamists, and other multi-positions actors were made on the ground during protests in solidarity with the revolutionary processes in Egypt and Tunisia. The movement brought individuals who had experienced or witnessed the policing and oppression of the years of lead, civil society actors, members of governing parties and parliamentary opposition, such as the Unified Socialist Party, PSU, and then a variety of organizations that really played a crucial role, such as ATTAC, the Committee for the Abolition of Third World Debt, and then organization within the clandestine left, such as Al-Munadila or the Militant Karen, as well as the Greater Casablanca Neighborhood Associations, which was formed in 2003. So on Sunday, 24th of April, there was a mass protest in 2011 with between an estimate of 10,000 to 35,000 protesters. And this was particularly important as it not only included people from these organizations that were backing up the movement that I've just mentioned, but also groups and individuals involved in smaller, popular sectoral working class struggles, such as residents of slums facing evictions, fruit and vegetable sellers who were holding banners calling for owners of wholesale markets to get out, and then street sellers. And of course, in speaking about street sellers, it's only appropriate to transition to talking about the movement of the Rif in 2016, 2017, which saw hundreds of thousands of people mobilize, initially in Hoceima, but not just in the Rif region, but in the whole of Morocco and then the wider diasporic Moroccan communities in Europe. So to give a brief overview again, the protests began when a fish seller called Mohsin Fikri was crushed to death in a rubbish truck in Al Hoceima, a city in the north of Morocco. So his fish was confiscated by the police under the banner of illegality, and he jumped into the truck to retrieve it. People who were there say that the police gave orders to the driver to crush him using the infamous expression of tanmo, or grind his mother. And Mohsin died there and then, but of course that expression had wider reverberations throughout the movement and beyond. So the Reef movement, whose former leader Nasser Zafzafi is currently serving 20 years in prison, was not simply a cultural or ethnic movement, as some would like to tell us. It's been branded for a long time as a separate movement, but it's actually, okay, thanks. But it's actually a movement against various things, including militarization. It's a movement for liberation at all levels and historic justice. It's a movement that has legacies of contention and memories of collective resistance at its heart, starting from the Bouhmara revolution in the 20th century to anti-colonial resistance and the war in the Reef in 1921-27, and then the Reef revolts in 58-59. There's been a persistent marginalization of the Reef, both under colonial rule and since independence by the Makhzen, forcing this region into dependency on local industries, such as the case with fish or hashish and cannabis in the region. I'll just briefly show a couple of, do I have time to do that?
You don't, but you can show some pictures if you want, quickly.
Yeah, so I'll just focus on showing this one actually from one of the 20th February protests. And then the last one is from the Reef, and it says, it's a graffiti that says, the Reef will kneel to none but God. I'll end it here, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Miriam. I think you need to end. Yeah, great. Okay, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Mariam. Thank you, Hamza. Thank you all of you. Thank you, Mariam, also to TNI. I'm so grateful to be here and to listen to you. I will also try to give a very basic, maybe for some people, but just the basic context of what the uprising that took place in Sudan starting in December 2018 and that stretched into 2019. And in some ways, it's still actually going on today, although in a different form. Basically, the so-called second wave, the second wave of uprisings in the Middle East and North Africa began in Sudan. And Sudan, of course, is very peripheral to the region in many ways for many historical reasons that I probably don't get into. So this is actually quite interesting, the ways in which it is influenced by the region, but also in some other aspects of it, at times quite disconnected from it. But before I really go on to talk about the December 2018 revolution, I think what was really interesting about Mariam's presentation is, at least in my opinion, the first wave was spoken of in quite simplistically, as if it was sort of like the beginning of history of this region. And of course, we know that part of the reason why that is because the region had always been constructed, particularly in sort of through the colonial knowledge production machine, as a region where people were submissive and they liked to live under dictatorship. They liked to be governed by these big, strong men and so forth. And so part of it in the early stages of the first wave, there was this kind of shock that, these people from that region could actually revolt, And so I think it's very important to actually look, as Mariam said, at the accumulation of organizing know-how, of history, of contestation that actually leads to these moments, right? Where people's subjectivities also change in these moments of these revolutionary moments, these moments of this kind of potential. So Sudan, of course, has, for us, it's quite, what happened in 2011 was familiar in the sense that our post-colonial history was very much a history of military regimes which come to power through coups d'etats. Only 11 years since 1956, since independence, are years where we have had elected civilian governments in power. The rest have been military regimes that have come to power by force. And those military regimes are then brought down by civic uprisings, usually civic uprisings that are led by unions, by professional associations, and by political parties, but really that are led mostly by people on the street who are fed up with the situation. And we see this period of kind of civic growth and a lot going on, but then a few years later, we typically inevitably revert to another military regime. And so this kind of has been this dance in our own history. So I just very, very quickly want to talk about the years that led up to this uprising. Essentially, 2011 was also extremely significant in Sudan, not only because neighboring Egypt and neighboring Libya, just across the Red Sea, Yemen, all of this was going on, but also because it was the year, of course, that Sudan split into two. So this was the year in which South Sudan, the South Sudanese voted in a referendum, and the country became divided into Sudan and South Sudan. From that period on, we see actually a massive, a lot of organizing, underground organizing start, partly because of the economic situation, partly because with the secession of the South, a lot of the oil revenues that had kept the state afloat disappeared. And so you see a massive rise in the kind of very predatory practices by the state of just mass dispossession, land dispossession, resource capture, incredible levels of corruption, with ordinary people having a harder and harder time to survive. In December 2018, small protests started actually outside Khartoum, which was notable because often with the earlier uprisings, the center was Khartoum. They started in Adbara and they started in Damazin, in these towns that have these histories also of resistance. And they were called bread riots initially. And they actually, and we'll come back to this maybe later, this question of, economic or political revolutions. But essentially, the protests ended up spreading. And in December 2018, one major aspect that changed kind of the potential of these protests was that the Sudanese Professionals Association, the SPA, which is a coalition, an underground coalition, a banned coalition of professional unions that include the teachers' unions, but it also includes doctors and engineers and so forth, that they they came out in support of the protests and started organizing. And in January, we have the Declaration of Freedom of Change that was signed, which was essentially a document, that very short document that said, we will bring this regime down. We are not negotiating with this regime. We are going for the fall of this regime. This is not a reformist movement. And it gave a very specific set of demands. And it coalesced a group of the NGOs, the still social movements, as well as the political parties that had been in opposition to the state. In April, protesters occupied the area in front of the Military General Command, and that was a very pivotal moment for the movement. But also you had, and they don't get as much attention, but you had at least 12 other occupations in other parts of the country. And these spaces, this is actually what I'm right now mostly looking at, is the kind of new practices and the kinds of imaginations, but also practices of living together that emerged in this space. And potentially this movement, which with these occupations, led to the fall of Omar Hassan al-Bashir in April, but then the military as an establishment, as we also see in Algeria, came up to stabilize the power. And we ended up with an agreement in August 2019, after, of course, massive violence had been done against protesters, of power sharing. The couple of years since, because we are in what the international community calls a transitional period, have seen exactly this kind of dynamic that actually Mariam spoke about in the beginning, which is there's a lot of contestation happening, but there's also a powerful backlash happening against these revolutionary demands, and particularly the issue of justice for the victims of the regime is quite explosive, as well as the deteriorating economic situation actually in the country. So maybe I will return to some of these issues later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. That's really great. So I'm gonna, and thank you both, Sarah and Miriam, for trying to do this as short as possible. I know it's like a torture. But we have much more time later to go into other details. I'm very happy to announce the next two speakers. But before I do so, I think we want to show also a short video montage to get back in sort of the mode and mood of Algeria, but also I think Western Sahara very important because, as I said, hardly ever mentioned. So let's see if the videos are ready.
Can you name Africa's last colony? Western Sahara has been occupied by neighboring Morocco for more than 40 years. Yet most people have never heard of the conflict. Western Sahara was a Spanish colony until 1975. But after the Spanish left, the indigenous population of Western Sahara, the Sahrawis, did not obtain independence. Instead, the Moroccan king declared that Western Sahara belonged to Morocco and invaded the country, even though the king's claim to the territory had been rejected by the International Court of Justice a few months earlier. Thousands of Sahrawi families fled the Moroccan bombs to Algeria, where they set up refugee camps in the desert. Here, the Sahrawis established an exile state, and for more than 15 years, the Sahrawi Liberation Movement, Polisario, fought the Moroccan invaders. During the war, Morocco built a wall extending more than 2,000 kilometers across the desert. With the aid of more than 100,000 soldiers and millions of landmines, the wall still separates the occupied territories from the rest of Western Sahara. In the occupied territories, the Sahrawis live under Morocco's brutal occupation, where peaceful resistance is met by violence, imprisonment, and torture. Outside the occupied territories, many Sahrawis still live in refugee camps, surviving on international food aid.
من أجلك عشنا يا وطني نفدي بالروح أراضينا قد كنا أمس عمالقة في الحرب نذل أعادينا وإن اليوم عمالقة في السلم حماة مبادينا من أجلك
Wow. I think it's really, really important. We see it also in the comments in the chat for a lot of people to see the introduction on the Western Sahara case as well in the video, because I think that a lot of people don't know. And the video on Algeria, again, goosebumps. And I'm kind of thinking like, why didn't we win all the revolutions? Seeing so many people. This is going to be part of your introductions, of course. Let me tell our audience who you are. So first of all, we have, I'm very proud to introduce Khali Hina Mohammed, a Sahrawi activist and campaigner. And as a Moroccan, I just want to say to Khali Hina, you're my brother. We're not just neighbors. And for the audience, I will say, Miriam Mabrouk and me will get a lot of trolls tomorrow, but that's fine. We're proud of that, to extend our solidarity with Western Sahara and make it very clear and public that this is a just cause. So he's an activist and campaigner and co-founder of what I think has the coolest title of all the NGOs I've ever seen, the Sahrawi Campaign Against the Plunder of Natural Resources. And he's currently the vice president of the Sahrawis Against the Plunder. and he's very interested in the work he's doing, particularly in an anti-capitalist and struggles and food sovereignty struggles. So that's Khali Hina, who will tell us a bit about the struggle in a few moments. But first, I want to also introduce Malia Bouattia, an Algerian British activist and commentator. She's the former president of the UK's National Union of Students, the NUS, the first Black woman actually who was president of the NUS, and she's co-founder of the Students Not Suspects or Educators Not Informants network, which is a movement or a campaign that was organized in response to the prevent policies in Britain. She's a contributor of several newspapers and outlets, including The Guardian, Middle East Eye, and The New Arab, and she's currently also an editor at Red Pepper magazine. So first of all, I would like to ask Khali Hina, can you give us a sort of quick introduction in about 7 minutes about the struggle that you're representing today?
Thank you. Thank you, Mariam, and thank you for all colleagues and brothers here and sisters. I would like to thank TNI and Rosa Luxemburg and all co-organizers of this webinar, which is very important. And I would like to say to Mariam that, of course, we are brothers. And for Sahrawis, since the beginning, it was very clear that our revolution was were against the regime, not the people of Morocco. And that's what explains why Sahrawis coexist and co-living with the Moroccans peacefully, because they also consider them as victims who were pushed systematically to get into this game, which is bigger than all of us, but we need to fight and to prove ourselves also, and to not give up. I would like to start with giving introduction to my group, Sahrawis Against the Plunder. It's grassroots groups that works from Sahrawi refugee camps, putting in mind as principle the activism against the multinational companies, and because we think that without this economic interests and capitalists, let me say, backing of the Moroccan occupation, Morocco would not last in front of Sahrawi struggles. And the reason behind the Moroccan continuation of their illegal occupation to Western Sahara, mainly because of the resources being plundered and the money they generate thanks to the support they get from multinational companies that are engaged in occupied Western Sahara illegally. So we as a group focus on educate people, raise awareness among Sahrawi people about these issues, open their eyes to the new and current struggle around the world around food sovereignty and people's sovereignty over their natural resources, and then mobilize them to take actions against this multinational and networking with activists around the world to make their voice heard and to make their actions have its fruits. Now, to give a background on Western Sahara, I would like to emphasize that the context where we as Sahrawis found ourselves in is different from all contexts in terms of that we are still, if all uprising in our region and elsewhere were in national states or post-colonial states, we in Western Sahara still struggling to gain our independence, to gain our freedom. And I would like to emphasize that our struggle is also part of the anti-colonialism revolutions. So it's part of liberation movements. So we are a lasting liberation movement that goes since 60s and 70s, and Western Sahara is considered a non-self-governing territory. And the only way to resolve this issue is through respecting the will and the aspiration of the people of this territory throughout a referendum, where Sahrawis say their last word about their political and legal status, which definitely would not be, from what I know, a choice of a monarchy, another monarchy where a son inherits the crown from their ancestors. So yeah, so for Western Sahara also, it's very important to highlight that this anti-colonialism has lasted to face the new face of colonialism, because we in Western Sahara are dealing with those who work on behalf of old colonialism, which is the Moroccan regime, and backing them, in their back exists these multinational companies and new international system that cares all about interests. And that's what explains for us the failure of the United Nations in meet its promises in organizing a referendum. After Sahrawis fought for 16 years a civil war against the invaders, as has been explained in the videos, the United Nations has intervened to reach a ceasefire in 1991 with the promise to organize a referendum for Sahrawis within 6 months. But this has took a long time since then. And we have opened our eyes also, as we came from a background that is Bedouin. We were living freely in our territories. We never obeyed any or being controlled by any system around in the region. And from that also there is a part of innocence, let me say. So we believe that the United Nations as an international system would meet its promises and would meet our aspiration in organizing at least a referendum where we have our freedom to say our last word about territory, but this never happened. And we discovered this lately, that United Nations were there to maintain the ceasefire in order that these multinational companies and European Union and Western countries continue plundering Western Sahara phosphates, fisheries, and other minerals in Western Sahara. And that's what kept Morocco also continuing, as I explained. After this failure, to know that now we currently to go back from peace, or the let me call it fake peace, from 1991 to now, Sahrawi youth and people like me who were born in refugee camps, they realized that we need to resume our struggle with all means. And that's what brings us now to resuming war in Western Sahara after Morocco and its allies in the UN Security Council shows their will for not finding any solution to Western Sahara. Currently, we are in a war situation. And sorry.
That's okay.
Okay.
We will get back to a lot of this in a moment. But I think one of the very important geopolitical issues also has to do with Algeria. So I would like to invite our next speaker, Malia. As we've seen in the video, the refugees fled to Algeria mostly. And so Algeria also has sort of part and parcel to do with the Western Sahara conflict. Added to all the other conflicts you already have, which led to a revolution. Tell us more about that.
Thank you, Mariam. I want to start by also thanking Hamza, you, Mariam, and the Transnational Institute for inviting me and hosting such an incredible panel that I'm really honored to be a part of. So I'll try to be quick, but to give some context, in February 2019, Algerians across the country took to the streets in their millions upon hearing that the former president Abdelaziz Bouteflika was seeking a fifth mandate. Bouteflika had been in power for almost 2 decades, a period in which the population had witnessed growing political repression, state violence, rising unemployment, growing privatization, and selling off of the public sector, all of which had followed a decade of bloody civil war. La misère, misery, was the reality unnecessarily forced on the Algerian people for too long. And the Heracle, what the movement is known as, not only forced Bouteflika out of the race, but also into resigning, which was one of the most exhilarating events in Algeria's recent history. Young and old people danced, chanted, sang and cried at the sight of what their weeks of efforts had achieved. And the considerable victory was largely achieved through crucial strikes by workers from the civil service to the strategically vital natural gas and oil industries, who ironically walked off the job after an official letter from Sonatrach, the government-owned oil company, warned workers against striking and participating in the Heracle. Whilst the protests started with the particular demand of his removal, they went further still to demanding that they've all got to go. The people understood that in order to uproot the very system that gave Bouteflika and his thieves, the Isaba, the green light to rob the people and repress them, was still very much in place, irrespective of who the president's seat was filled by. The military regime that had since Algeria's war of independence from French colonial rule, which ended in 1962, sealed its control, discarding via coups, forced exile and assassinations anyone that stood in the way, was now the target. And this was despite the military's best efforts to save itself by removing Bouteflika at the people's will. And as the Algerian singer Raja Mziane put it as she addressed the regime, "This flood is at your door and the crowd is coming." For over a year that followed, the crowd didn't cease. It was months of weekly demonstrations, every Tuesdays and Thursdays, sit-ins, protests, strikes, rallies, and calls for boycotts by millions of Algerian workers, students, the unemployed, housewives, shop owners, and not to mention the Heracle organized a successful mass boycott of the national elections in December 2020 that was called Despite Postponements, due to their pressure and success in delegitimizing the regime's political systems. And the now president, Tebboune, who was elected, isn't even officially recognized as a consequence. So labor and student movements played a key role. Hundreds of workers staged sit-ins outside the headquarters, the General Union of Algerian Workers, which is the official and regime-controlled trade union federation, to force the general secretary down, who was, of course, seen as a stooge. And they even held a national conference to organize the future of the labor movement. Alongside this, independent unions, especially within education, also joined the protests and organized strikes. Even judges took strike action over the lack of independence of the legal system, which was often used to repress and intimidate opposition. Not much has changed there. Insurance workers went on strike, as well as the National Union of Energy Workers. Students organized mass assemblies to strategize and build for the long term. The occupations and demonstrations became so big that the regime would impose early holidays in an attempt to send students home and stop them organizing. And it's important to note that the mobilizations also expanded to the diaspora around the world, from France and Canada to the UK and Belgium. All eyes seemed to be on Algeria, and for once it was more than just about the football, not that I would discount that is also important. The land of 1.5 million martyrs had erupted once more and shaken the iron grip of its masters. Historically, the country has been either the Mecca of revolutionaries or terrorists, depending on the political side that you sit on, based on its armed struggle against French colonial rule, which lasted 132 years. And the struggle waged by the National Liberation Front, both inspired by independence movements and revolts across the global South, notably the Indochina War and the success of the Battle of Dien Bien Phu in Vietnam, but also served as a source of inspiration for all those who are yet to succeed in their fight for liberation. And this very legacy is one that has always remained with the people and their conviction to continue in their fight for justice, even if the enemy today looks a lot more like them. The Heracle Chant, Ya Ali, oh, I'm so sorry. Am I going too quickly? I apologize. The Heracle Chant, يا علي عمار بلادي في الدنجي نكملوا فيها la bataille d'Alger. Hey Ali Ammar, Ali Ammar, my country is in danger. We will complete the Battle of Algiers, in reference to the independence struggle hero Ali Ammar, also known as Ali Lapointe. which showed the continuation of the fight for liberation, which was seen to have begun with the anti-colonial movement. So just to give you kind of a quick update on the current situation, when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, the Algerian people declared temporary hiatus in their revolution in order to respect the restrictions necessary to stop the spread of the virus. And the regime took full advantage of the pandemic period by introducing countless repressive measures, including constitutional reforms not supported by the people, arresting prominent dissenting voices who had been deeply rooted in the Heracle, and Tebboune even seized the opportunity to target journalists and those in the media who were critical of the status quo. As well as arrests, laws were put in place to supposedly clamp down on fake news, but the writing was literally on the walls of Algiers. Heracle shall return after COVID-19, the protesters had warned. And 1 year, and to mark the second anniversary, they flooded the streets of Algeria once more.
Wow. Thank you so much. Wonderful.
Thanks for both speakers. Now we are going into a discussion. So we're going to ask questions to all four speakers, and before opening it to the Q&A. So the first question would be to Miriam and Sara. We saw, like in the first wave of the Arab uprisings, as well as the current wave, we saw a deep connection between political and economic grievances. But frequently in mainstream media, the focus is always on the political demands of freedom and democracy. So I think it would be good to hear a few thoughts on the economic context and how that is enforced by global power structures. Basically, it would be great if you could outline some of the economic roots of the revolutions and uprisings in Morocco and Sudan. Miriam, do you want to start?
So yeah, absolutely, Hamza. These movements have been framed as movements just making simplistic constitutional democratic demands in line with the ruling classes themselves, promoting the so-called Moroccan exception to the rule argument. But of course, that's only one part of the equation. Both in the case of 20 February and the Reef, the demands that were made were economic, political, social, cultural, and linguistic, particularly with the involvement of a section of the Imaziran or Amazigh cultural movement in the struggle. But these waves of revolutionary movements have also built on a legacy of protests that started to crystallize in Morocco in the mid-90s. So movements that made socioeconomic demands for the right to education, housing and public services, employment, and the right to be able to sell merchandise in the street. When it comes to the economic roots, they are in a way connected to a story that gives us a picture of two contradicting Moroccan states that exist within one place. So in one of them, we have a hyper-capitalist Morocco of mega projects, the high-speed train, Casa Marina, and other development projects, ports, Morocco Mall, palaces, Maseratis and Ferraris on the streets, villas in La Mamounia, and luxurious riads that no one can ever afford. And then on the other hand, we also have a Morocco where women give birth on the streets because they don't have access to hospitals, where food sovereignty is practically non-existent due to relying on global capital for staple goods. And on top of this, we have the energy sector, which is in the hands of international and local private companies who accumulate profit. And this means that Moroccans are forced to pay exorbitant prices. So during the COVID-19 crisis, for example, there were many reports of families, including mine, who had an energy bill of 2,000 plus dirhams per month, when normally it should be a tenth of that, if not a bit more. So here we have a situation of political authoritarianism of the Makhzen and a capitalism on steroids, which accelerates the development of mega projects and spatial authoritarianism in the city, and then encourages industrial monocultures in rural spaces that are aimed largely at the export market, as is the case with the Reef. This is why it's important to look at connections between colonialism and the impact of neoliberalism and the IMF structural adjustment program, environmental justice and class inequality, to fully understand the struggles of everyday Moroccans and how these systems of oppression change their relationship to food and natural resources. I'll end it here.
Great, Miriam. Sarah, what about Sudan?
There's a lot of echoes of Sudan in what Miriam said. Actually, I mean, it's actually interesting that when the uprising first hit international media, like the AP and Reuters and them, it hit it as these are bread riots, actually. And interestingly, that was, I thought around December or January, December 2018 or January 2019, when the protests had really picked up steam. An article appeared by, written by Nisreen Omar and Zakaria Mthili, who are both, Nisreen is a Sudanese a scholar, leftist scholar based in the US, and Zakaria works on African social movements. And they said, these are not just bread riots. But what's interesting is what they were trying to do, in a sense, was to, of course, present what was happening in its full complexity. But the way to do that was to say that these are actually human rights struggles to the West, so that the West would take them seriously, right? These are civil struggles. In fact, they're the same, because it is the economic conditions, the wide scale, I would say the wide scale looting that has happened, not just through the Omar al-Bashir regime, but also through the networks and allies that it has both within the country, within the capitalist class within the country, but also that extend out of Sudan into the Gulf region and into other areas. It's difficult to describe the systematic dispossession that has happened to the vast numbers of Sudanese, particularly in the war-affected areas. Because if you look at where there is the highest degree of conflict in the country, these are areas that are extremely rich in terms of resources. This is Darfur, this is Nuba Mountains and South Kordofan, this is Blue Nile. And of course, previously it was South Sudan, which had from the colonial period on been treated just as a place of extraction, right? Somewhere where you go and extract resources. So this extractive mentality was actually adopted by the post-colonial governments and reached its peak during the al-Bashir regime. I think it's very important when we try to make these distinctions to look at the way actually ordinary protesters that went out into the street to protest, the way they kind of conceptualize this link between the two. In Sudan, we don't talk just in general about the state or the government or the regime. We call them Kezan. We have this word called Kezan, right? And the origin of this word actually comes from the Islamist movement, which was behind the military coup of 1989. But it initially was associated with the Islamists, but eventually this word took on a life of its own, and it came to embody essentially a kind of person that instrumentalizes state power and religion as well in some cases for economic gain. And so what is really interesting is to see the ways in which today, and I want to really touch very briefly on the question of how does the global economic order link to what's happening? I personally, and I've written about this, I consider this global economic order, in our case, it comes in the shape of the international development community or the international community. It is actually a counter-revolutionary force in our context, where the development industry is a massive, massive player in Sudan. And it's a massive player for many reasons. We have $60 billion in debt to various debt holders, from the IMF to the World Bank to others. And 85% of it is in arrears, right? And essentially what is happening now is that there is an attempt by the civilian component of the government to fix the economy. But unfortunately, there has been a massive focus on essentially fulfilling the conditions of the international players, the big players like the IMF and also the Western countries that are invested in supporting Sudan's transition. I'm putting all of this in quotes. But we have not dealt with the actual reality of the fact that people's land, they don't control the land, they cannot grow their own food. We're one of the biggest exporters of gold in the world. Most of this gold is smuggled out of the country into networks, going into the UAE, and from that into the global market. Not only is this gold not being for the people, used for the people's well-being, while people don't have access to healthcare, to education, to basic human things, but it's actually on top of it creating incredible environmental destruction as well in these areas. And so the economic aspect of this is not only still a kind of lightning rod in terms of what's happening, but also it is still an instrument through which the demands are tamed, because people are told that we have to be integrated back into the international community in order for life to then to start to improve. And so there is also, of course, a lot of pushback against this.
Thank you both. Actually, I wanted to ask the next two people to continue a little bit on this question. So Galena and Malia, the relation to the resources, as also Sara just mentioned, is really important, right? So let's focus for a moment on the sort of, shameless plundering and appropriation of resources, both in Algeria and occupied Western Sahara by both the ruling classes and, I guess, international multinationals. Can you give us an idea about the richness of your country? Like the North African region and many parts of Africa are always seen as sort of poor and backward, actually like quite rich if you think about it. Can you give us some insight about that, and also in how the significant natural resources are grabbed at the expense of the local populations and communities? And if possible, can you also touch on the demands and campaigns around sovereignty over these resources, and how are they related to, for instance, demand against extractivism, or maybe a critique of geostrategic interest? I thought maybe we can start with Western Sahara. This is particularly your campaign, isn't it?
Thank you. Yeah, it is indeed our own main task, because we think, as I argued in my intervention, that natural resources and the sovereignty of people over these natural resources is the key in the whole issue. When we talk about people's sovereignty over their land, over their territory, we should start with natural resources and the economic aspect in all these struggles. I think that the mainstream media focus on political aspects of revolutions, and uprising is part of this, let me say, game of the system, when they want to distract people attention from the core issue. Without sovereignty over our resources, we will not be independent politically. So it's well argued. I'm not saying this, it's all experts and it's reality on the ground. Without having sovereignty over our choices, what to use from our natural resources, when to use it, how to use it, this is our independence would be always questioned, and it would be always undermined. And I think that experiences in many post-colonial states showcase this argumentation. In Western Sahara, we believe as activists focusing on this matter that it is the most important. And our work is focusing on the richness of our country as one of the pillars of the continuation of the occupation, of the colonialism and its consequences. So Western Sahara is so rich in fish. It has a very rich costs of fish, and that's why EU, European Union, doesn't care about its court rulings when they say that Western Sahara is not part of Morocco, and the agreements that can be concluded with Morocco should not include Western Sahara. They don't listen to these courts, and they, don't care at all about their legality when it comes to their economic interests in Western Sahara. Phosphate, Western Sahara have the second largest reservoir of phosphate. And when talking about phosphate, it's dominating and controlling agriculture businesses. And that's why companies are very interested in getting in cooperation with Morocco to plunder that resource that is unrenewable. And the irony is that we find giant companies, multinational companies like Siemens, investing in renewable energy to extract this unrenewable energy, that it is ours. So when we get our independence, we will find out that this resource has come to an end. Yeah. We don't enjoy it. And that now Siemens is there in occupied territories to invest illegally with Morocco. Yeah. I think also that it is never were forgotten about Sahrawis along their struggle since the beginning. Yeah, I think, to emphasize that the mainstream media is part of the system and their focus on political is just part of the game. So people don't talk about their economic demands that has been showcased throughout all Uprising.
Yeah, hence the importance of your focus on anti-capitalism as well, right, in your project. Maybe Malia, do you have any ideas about this?
Yeah, I'll be brief, but for those who aren't aware, since the 70s, the considerable majority of the national budget has been dependent on oil and gas revenues, I think around 80%. And the oil crisis in the 80s was followed by a move towards the private sector and a clear shift towards the economic liberalization in the 90s, and the move was followed by a gradual privatization of some public companies. Some may have been keeping tabs on the steel industry, in particular, SNS, the steel company, which was set up in '64, being sold to an Indian company. But all of these, whenever these questions arise, the people continue to ask the same question: where is the money? Where is the wealth? This is supposed to be an oil-rich nation, but that wealth is certainly not being shared or redistributed. And I think that through the Heracle in particular, when these questions have come up and around the discussions of the hydrocarbons bill, for example, the demand has remained accountability and redistribution. That, everybody is aware, and many in Algeria on the streets could recount to you that the figures of, like, in offshore accounts of which minister and which businessman close to the regime has managed to funnel what funds in what offshore account in which country, like, to such extensive detail. So people are aware, they're aware that it's that they're certainly not reaping the benefits of what is available from the land that should be theirs and that fought for so long. But yeah.
So we have another question, and this one will be to all speakers, around the liberation of Palestine. We know that the liberation of Palestine is one fundamental question for emancipatory struggles in the Arab region. Malia, we saw how the Algerian protesters were waving the Palestinian flag as well as the Algerian one in the weekly marches from 2019 and 2020. There is some kind of specificity with the Algerian case when it comes to Palestine, isn't there?
Yeah, I think that one that is shared by both peoples, at least in my interactions. I mean, I'd say equally being on the demonstrations, I'd see as many Palestinian flags as I did Algerian and Berber ones. And without fail, the constant chanting of Philistine, Shuhada Philistine, placards saying that Palestine is the 49th state of Algeria, and people. And I think that to a certain extent the regime does it, but the masses are under no illusion where the true solidarity from both sides, I hope, truly stems from. And I think that for a long time, the regime has tried to ride kind of the historical legacy of being close allies to any revolutionary movement, and that kind of, you know, the third worldism that Algeria was, was forever linked to. But that yes, I think that, but people knew and understood that it was in the hearts and in the actions of those on the ground, and you know, whatever statements come, irrespective of like in relation to particular attacks, the people come out. And I think that Algerians see the continued struggle for liberation as part and parcel of the one that was started, you know, with the with all anti-colonialist movements globally. And there are, of course, like small historical snippets, but the unconditional support is incredible. I mean, to the extent that, you know, Algerian footballers would play Palestine and would refuse to win against them, and those actions go a long way into like keeping that element of solidarity and consciousness alive. I feel that it continues to be a representation that despite everything that the Palestinian people endure and are faced with due to Israel's actions, that if they continue to resist, nobody really has any excuse. It's, you know, they are, if anything, they are our driving force.
Yes, thanks, Malia, for this. Staying with Palestine, and this question now is for the other three speakers. We saw recently a wave of normalizations with Israel from the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco, in a context where forces of counter-revolution are gaining more ground. In the case of Morocco, there was a kind of a quid pro quo transaction where the former US President Trump recognized Morocco's claim over Western Sahara in exchange of the kingdom normalizing its relations with Israel. So Khalihinna, Sarah, and Miriam, what are your thoughts about this? Maybe we start with Khalihinna and then Sarah.
I think that point that this shows again that we are at the end of this in the same circle as freedom fighters, wherever they are, at any moment, in any continent, in any country. And the case of Palestine is a key issue to understand Western Sahara and all uprising around the region, because at the end of the day, the region that is occupying illegally Western Sahara is representing the system that the same replaced the United Kingdom in Palestine at some time, and the Zionist movement that occupied Palestine are against our principles as a human being, as progressive, and we need to unify. And then we see how they also manipulate and play with the game, the system that they have constructed to their own interests. Trump, with simple gesture, gave to Morocco that he does not own over Western Sahara in exchange of normalization, and that in itself question Morocco's sovereignty, claimed sovereignty over Western Sahara. How you exchange a sovereignty that you say that it's yours with in such a bad deal to normalize relation with Israel against the will of the Palestinian people. But unfortunately, many like Islamist movements in Palestine are not having a good position in this relation, and we see the last visit from Hamas to Morocco after this normalization, and they were supposed to be on the side of the people. And what Morocco has done, and the Islamist party in Morocco has done, should take them out of their, let me say, spectrum. Now we see that Hamas is helping Morocco to ease the consequences of that move, But for us as Sahrawis, at the end, we think that the people own their destiny when they own their actions on the ground. And I say always that actions speak louder than words. What Trump has done, what they have done with Israel does not concern us. Palestinian also has shown that they are stronger than ever in continuing their struggle. And we, at the end of the day, we are not struggling for our national independence. We are struggling for shared values and principles, apart from our religions, ethnicity, without discrimination. And Israel would not gain at the end, as Morocco would not gain, because we are representing the people will.
Thank you, Khalihina. Sarah, any thoughts about this?
Yeah, I mean, very briefly, this is a very controversial issue. It was a very controversial issue and continues to be in Sudan. Historically, the Sudanese have stood very firmly with the Palestinian cause. Unfortunately, the regime of Omar Hassan al-Bashir very much so instrumentalized the Palestinian cause, and also was close to Hamas and publicly supported Hamas. And the most important thing to say is that the international community, the so-called international community, but really the imperialist countries, particularly the US, which has put Sudan under sanctions since the 1990s, and the sanctions have been extremely crippling to the country, more to the people than to the regime. That they tied the condition of the removal of Sudan from the US state sponsors of terrorism list and of sanctions with normalization with Israel. So it became a condition that, along with paying compensations to US victims of terrorist attacks that took place in East Africa, the government led by Abdullah Hamdok, the civilian prime minister, accepted the conditions of the US because it had deemed its reintegration into the international political diplomatic community, the lifting of sanctions, as essential to its economic program. And so what's important to say is that although it came kind of like a bomb and it seemed to come out of nowhere, it is also clear that the al-Bashir regime, which had very strong rhetoric against Israel, was secretly, most likely, also already collaborating with the Israeli regime. I think the debate was very much controlled by certain sources, but I think what is important to also note in the case of Sudan is that it has big implications on the Sudanese in Israel themselves, because there's a lot of Darfurian and other Sudanese refugees in Israel who are treated extremely horribly in an incredibly racist way. And so for Israel, it's not just a question of isolating the Palestinians, but it's very clear that this is twinned with a policy of being able to deport and evict these refugees who have every right under international law to be there.
Thank you, Sarah. Miriam, maybe you can add and tell us a little bit more about the row between Spain, the recent row between Spain and Morocco over Western Sahara and migrants.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd just like to clarify a couple of things when we talk about normalization deal. In Morocco, we have the official normalization, which is the deal that was signed. And then we have other more historical forms of normalization, which this normalization deal is a continuation of. So we have cooperation on military, diplomatic bases, also technological, agricultural, and commercial collaborations. And one of the striking cases of these kinds of collaborations is, of course, Morocco obtaining Israel's help in 1965 to spy on meetings in Casablanca between Arab leaders and commanders. and this kind of surveillance actually helped with the assassination of Mehdi Ben Barka, and was essential information that helped in the outcome of the Six-Day War. But of course, we'd be falling into denialism if we say that this normalization deal changes nothing, because at the same time, it's a mobilization of a deeply ingrained nationalist and chauvinistic discourse for imperial purposes. And historically, the Moroccan left was very, very aware of this, which is why, you know, people like Sarfati wrote about Western Sahara comparing it to Palestine, which is why Moroccan liberation was viewed as Maghrebi liberation and not just some kind of local struggle. So this deal, there are many aspects to this deal, including the fact that it promotes a local arms industry. There are in the actual deal, and then there are rumors of some kind of American military base moving to Morocco, but it's not yet sure how or when that would happen. Then there is again this kind of redeployment of American militarization towards the African space. And here we can visibly see the imperial dimensions of the different nodes involved in this deal, which is the Morocco-Israel node, and then the US-Morocco node, and then the Israel-US node. When it comes to Ceuta, so it supposedly started out with the Brahim Ghali, the leader of the Western Sahara Polisario Front, who was admitted in a hospital in Madrid during the COVID period. So there were a lot of rumors about this kind of war of the media, if you will, including how he entered with a fake passport. And there were various official statements released by the Moroccan state where basically it was saying that it's extending its leg to teach Spain a lesson. So what happened with this is that there was a real human unfortunate outcome to this, which is Morocco and Spain playing with the lives of migrants from Morocco and migrants within Morocco going to Ceuta. And of course, there's a dimension to this in which the Moroccan state is exercising pressure using different means, including the question of counter-terrorism support for Europe, or the question of borders, where it acts as Europe's border guard by proxy, effectively. But there's also the other dimension to this, which is this is happening in the first place because there is an existing fortress Europe, which marginalizes and excludes people from certain spaces unless they were rich. But I think it's also important on top of this to talk about, address a dimension of the normalization deal, which other normalization deals in the region might not have, which is that Morocco actually relies on some kind of imagined, reinvented, symbolic cultural and historical heritage, where, for example, one of the official justifications for normalization is that there's an important Moroccan community in Palestine, and that it argues that Morocco is not an anti-Semitic state, therefore why should we deny our Jewish brothers and sisters their right to exist? But of course, this is problematic because there's inherent anti-Semitism within it, which conflates Jewishness with the Israeli settler colonial project. And most importantly, this is an attempt to brush over the crimes of these Moroccans, including those with senior positions in the Israeli occupation forces against Palestinians, and to brush over the crimes of the Moroccan state itself, which has made Moroccans into colonial settlers and soldiers in Palestine. I'll end it here.
Fascinating and enlightening. Thank you for all your insights. Miriam?
Yeah, I thought maybe I can start also including some of the questions from the Q&A in some of the questions we have prepared with you in advance. So I wanted to actually go to Malia and Sara to ask you about something that is very important when we talk about revolutionary rehearsals and how revolutions can be successful or not, and that is the question of organizing. And Sara, you already mentioned the role of sort of like the workers' movement, the trade union movement, and Malia, you also mentioned the role of history, right? The anti-colonial struggles. So, I mean, when we look at these inspiring uprisings in Algeria and Sudan, we can see that they have indeed released this, you know, like unlimited or amount of energy and creativity, and they've been very transformational, and they have released all this kind of sort of sense of agency, but there have also been quite different experiences among and between all these different moments in these uprisings and different groups that are part of them. Some are organizing around what is called horizontal means and structures. Others are emphasizing structures and leadership and political leadership in that sense. So they both have good and bad sides, right? The spontaneity, but also the sort of longevity that you need with structures. How has it been in your case, in your country? And how also in the last year, as we have seen, a lot of that has changed with the pandemic. How has the pandemic changed the way people organize? And what does it say about these different forms of organizing? Where does the weakness of whatever part of organizing they do come to the surface around the pandemic? But related to that also, when we talk about organizing and movements, and you know, we talk about harakat or the Hirak in Algeria or Morocco, some of the people in the Q&A asked you also a question about that. So Kaiko Sakai from Japan asked in response also to Malia's introduction, well, you know, you use different terms like Hirak, Haraka, but what is the difference between Hirak and, for instance, Thawra? What do you yourself prefer to use to describe Algeria? And there's also a question by Anke Bremer about the Hirak in Algeria. I think she understood it. I don't think that's what you meant at all, but she understood that you were referring to Hirak in Algeria as an Arabic movement. So how about the Amazigh? Looking at the recent elections, where some of the statistics show that nationally there's only been 40% voting, but actually among the Amazigh, the Qabil communities, almost 100% abstention from voting in Algeria. So how can we think of the Hirak as a constellation of common struggles and brings within the constellation of struggles also the Amazigh question? So actually, Malia, can I start with you? How does it, you know, make you describe these movements in terms of structures, and how does it semantically also cover the difference between revolution and uprisings, Thawra and Harakat?
I think that the use of the word Hirak by the people to define their movement actually explains a lot. It defines that there is no kind of one particular group, political party, element, faction, that it is something that you can all be a part of at any point. And despite its root word being an Arabic one, certainly the makeup of it, particularly this time around, has been quite incredible in relation to the Amazigh question. And at one point, where previously, since the independence of Algeria, I'd argued that the regime has utilized ethnic divisions, linguistic ones, cultural ones, anything that you want to call the question, to divide and effectively control, also to create at certain times heightened crisis and distraction, has just not worked. And I think that on so many levels, everything that the regime thought it could throw at the people in order to destroy the movement, and at one point even banned the Amazigh flag, just completely fell flat on their face. And I think that there is undoubtedly inspiration that people draw from those that they see even more oppressed amongst their population, and particular figures, young, particularly Berber women who had been arrested by the regime, have come to represent the future of the country in so many ways. And so whilst the Hirak has not necessarily been had a visible leadership one that could kind of be pointed to, names that could be referred to, and has prided itself based on kind of the divisions and the lessons learned of struggles past. The regime is certainly making those superstars of the Heracle, if you will, based on their repressive tendencies. And I'd also say that that some see it as both a positive or a negative. The fact that, you know, that there is no hierarchy or particular leadership that is structurally present, but either way, this is based on, you know, a legacy of the regime crushing all opposition, of destroying any potential for you know, an active rooted leadership. And so being there, coming from abroad, older generations in particular would discuss this to me, would discuss this as a real problem, because they said that once we uproot this thing, and we are going to, what will replace it and who's going to strategize around it? But I have full faith in the fact that this work is being done. It's just not necessarily in its traditional, it's not necessarily visible, nor in the most, in the traditional like habits of Algerian political action. And, you know, we've seen movements, conferences, civil society groups, and so on. And with the Berber question again, yeah, I'd reinforce that it really feels like a different time, and one in which Heracle very much reinforces there is no Berber, non-Berber, there is no, not that there isn't, but I mean that, like, we're all in this collectively because we've been oppressed and repressed by you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Sara, also, like Sudan, the question of identity and identity politics and internal oppressions have also, of course, come to the surface during the uprisings there. And also the question of terminology, what are the reference points? But I think also, as you said, the question of organizing, what kind of organizing is necessary to survive the uprising. Is this connected? Are these questions connected, or do you think they are not that connected in your case?
I think that they are connected. I think what's been very interesting, actually, if I look at the 64 uprising, the 85 uprising, the 64 uprising we call the revolution Thawra, Thawrat October. The 1985 uprising against the military regime, we chose instead to use the word intifada. So we didn't call it a revolution, we called it an intifada, our way of saying Heracle. And actually this last uprising we call the revolution. So that's a whole question. But what's interesting is that we know there were forms of leadership that we're quite familiar with in the Sudanese context. The most familiar form of leadership we know is of the trade unions. We have seen their leadership in the 1964 and 1985 uprisings. We saw their leadership again in this uprising. What's different, however, and to me this is really, I find it really interesting in terms of its future potentials as well, is that you see a process of learning from these older uprisings, but also I think the Egyptian revolution was also a very big learning moment for us as well. I mean, we were watching. Algeria is not so, for example, not so closely connected to Sudan, but it's more watching through Al Jazeera or watching through media. So I remember when the first Millionia went out in April, when the occupation happened through it, the Algerians whose uprising started later in February had already gone on the Millionia, and it was quite something to see the numbers on the street. And so I think there's a process more of watching from afar with Algeria as opposed to with Egypt, where it's the histories and the realities are much more intertwined. But what's interesting with this particular uprising is that, yes, you saw the Sudanese Professions Association play an incredibly powerful role. But what was interesting is the role of what we call in Sudan Lijan Muqawama, the resistance committees, right? And the resistance committees are not something historically that we've had. I mean, of course, now there's many people trying to trace them. I would say that what we see them start to be formed as these underground organizing cells, mostly of youth within neighborhoods, in the end of 2013, when there was an attempt at an uprising that was met very violently by the state. And you see these networks of youth within neighborhoods start to take leadership in mobilizing the resistance at a local level. Now, this process was accelerated by the revolution in Sudan massively. And what the SPA did very well at a certain point of the uprising was there was really good networking between these cells, which we have thousands of these resistance committees now in almost every neighborhood in the country, right? But you also see, and you know, I don't want to romanticize it, because you also see a very big class divide then come up. So up until April, actually, and maybe even until June, but in April, the negotiations start with the military. At this point, you see the SPA and the group of more elite kind of organizations, definitely in the resistance against the regime, but more of the middle class based Arab, Muslim, urban, Khartoum based groups. You see them start to negotiate as the forces of freedom of change with the military, while the resistance committees on the ground are the ones holding the occupation space, which is what actually allows there to be a negotiation to begin with, that actually is the biggest factor in pushing the military to, in causing the downfall of al-Bashir. And so I would say now you see the way history is being written, and it's all the SPA. Actually, the resistance committee's role has really been, I would say in Sudan, it's very well known, and they are still there, very much targeted today, actually, and under a lot of attack at the moment. But actually, their role, and this is more of the working class base of organizing of this revolution, is missing from the mainstream discussions, actually, of revolution. And so that is a new, relatively new structure that has a massive potential, but up to today, it has not figured out how to network itself under a clear and common set of demands. I mean, I don't think demands have to always be common. I think in a country as diverse as Sudan, if you are a resistance committee in Central Darfur, you're dealing with something quite different than if you're in a resistance committee in, you know, Amarat in Khartoum. But there is that power, and they were supposed to be represented in the legislative assembly, right? But those in power, we don't have a legislative assembly actually 2 years down the road. So they have been excluded from the official bodies of representation within the system. So this is interesting, and that's where I think you see the SPA largely breaking. I mean, you see the class, the sort of the break in terms of class happening from April 2019, where there's kind of a brakes being put on taking this uprising to its full potential in terms of kind of a radical change in society. I'm sorry I spoke so much.
No, that's fine. This is really fascinating. We have a lot of questions, and it's really hard to pick the ones to ask. I think we'll end with 2 questions, and I'll ask you to be brief, please. This question is for Khalihinna and Miriam. Do you think that there could exist in a close future links between the struggles in Western Sahara and the Reef? And the final question, perhaps for Sara and Malia, but briefly please, is to what extent has the revolutionary movements in Sudan and Algeria helped generate anti-capitalist ideas and independent organizations with a critical mass? Or conversely, what are the possibilities of such emerging from these democratic movements from below? Okay, so let's start with the first question around solidarities between the Reef and Western Sahara. Khalihinna and then Miriam.
Sorry. Yeah, my point of view is that all struggles at the end of the day are the same, wherever they are and whenever they are. And as our founder, Polisario leader, who has died very young, saying the secret of all our achievements and victories always lays with the people. So for me, whenever there is an uprising, a revolution that represents the people, there is a possibility of linkage. And that has been always the case between Sahrawis and Moroccan progressive forces. And Miriam has mentioned the case of Ilal Amam movement that have openly expressed their pro-Sahrawi position and show or describe the Western Sahara as Palestine of Africa. So for me, the gate is always open, and I think that we are learning. We may be at the time of anti-colonialism liberations, but we are learning from post-colonial struggles. And I think that there is always a chance to link. And the most importantly, to think about the grassroots, let me say our background is the people. The other are the system. So every time we have this background of this progressive vision, we can meet and we can cooperate, and we have the linkage, and we should cooperate. We must do it, and it's not a choice. It's an obligation for all of us, and our values, our principles must not be taken as isolated or separated. The case in Palestine should not be taken out or as unlike to the case in Western Sahara. The uprising in the Reef is an uprising against the same regime that oppressed the Sahrawi people and oppressing Sahrawi people all this time. So for us, it's always a chance. But to conclude, I think that also another task that we should not forget about is keeping, teaching, educating, raising awareness among our people, because the keys is always lays in the hands of the, let me say, educated, aware people, and not distracted. And that's our battle with the mainstream media in this time, for instance. And our main task should be, wherever we are, in every context, is focusing on the people. The more we have people with us, the more we have the people aware, the more we are close to reach our values and principles and noble objectives.
Miriam? Mariam?
Yes, thanks. Thanks for the question. I can't remember who asked it, but I mean, of course, I'm a revolutionary socialist. I like to live for that kind of optimism where you see different struggles coming together in different parts of the world. But at the same time, I think we also need to look at how deeply ingrained chauvinism, unfortunately, is through decades of Moroccan state strategy. A regular accusation that people in the Reef, for example, got, and even people in the 20th February movement, was that they are separatists, they are Algerian Asians, they are this and that Polisario Asians, and so on. And I think a major task facing the Moroccan left and other lefts in the Maghreb is to confront this kind of chauvinism in whatever form it exists, because in it there's an answer, there's a potential path to that kind of revolutionary convergence of struggles that we are talking about. And of course, as Khali Hanna says, there is a lot to learn from all these movements, and we have a whole revolutionary tradition that started in writing, at least in 1920, with a journal like Le Maroc Rouge or Red Morocco that we can learn from. And we also have these different forms of organizing that continue to burgeon, not just historically, but even now. But there are lessons that we can learn from the 20th February movement in particular, which I think are really quite important. And I think one of the main hindrances that face the movement is the lack of a very strong working class base of social struggle that is at the heart of these kinds of protesting masses and so on. But I think perhaps a more important lesson to learn from this is that what's going on globally and in our own regional spaces, wherever they are, is both stimulating, encouraging, joyful, but at the same time, it could be restrictive in some senses. So how the rise of the movement at the beginning of the process was strictly connected to the Tunisian revolution, to the Egyptian revolution, But at the same time, there is a frustration that was that followed with the crimes of the Assad regime in face of the Syrian uprising, with the outcome of the events in Libya, with the weakness and of different revolutionary processes achieved in other parts of the world, including Yemen, Egypt, and Tunisia. But at the same time, when we speak of chauvinism, we've also got to bear in mind optimism, as I said previously. And I do believe that these chauvinist arguments don't counter decades of revolutionary work, which argued that the liberation of Morocco is connected to the revolutionary process in the Maghreb, and that Western Saharan liberation is part of that process, and that it's also part of the process of other liberation processes in the wider African continent. And I'll just end it here and thank everyone for listening and for your questions.
Thanks, Miriam. We don't have a lot of time, so I'll ask Malia and Sara for some concluding remarks to answer the question. 1 minute each, please.
Do you want me to start? I'll be very...
Yes.
Okay. I think that it's difficult with Algeria because I guess the Herac hasn't exactly been structured that way, but Yitna Hawga, they've all got to go, you know, has profound implications. You know, it's a call for all officials and managers to be removed, and that demand for fundamental political and economic democracy isn't compatible with capitalism. And I think that it opens up a lot of possibilities. But I think that there'll need to be much more discipline, if you will, and concrete organization to confront and topple the state. And through that will inevitably be discussions on questions of the alternative and them based on the needs to relieve poverty and the concentration of capital by the state as understanding that the system that is certainly not will not allow such a transformation. I also think the involvement of workers, the national strikes, that all of these actions sprouting anywhere and everywhere and fundamentally rooted in we cannot continue in this misery, this poverty, this unemployment, this corruption will hopefully eventually lead to such revolutionary action and thought.
Thanks, Maria. Sara?
Yeah, in 1 minute, I think a lot,
Yes.
I would echo a lot of what's been said already. I think in our case, a very massive challenge for us is that the regime was very effective at isolating us from the region and isolating us from the world. And all the attention that's been received has been in terms of the economic isolation and of the sanctions, but actually we've been isolated from conversations with other social movements as well. And so I think I would also go to the slogan of the revolution. The first and most powerful slogan was "Tasqut bas, tasqut bas, tasqut faqat." Yani, when we have to extend this system from the collapse of simply that particular figurehead or those figureheads to the actual collapse of the whole capitalist, racialized capitalist system that exists in Sudan today and that very much keeps so many of us subjugated, whether under military regimes or under dictatorships. So I would say that we have to keep having these conversations, but we have to find a way also to involve more people and also for these conversations to continue and to support, not to be distracted by this macro, the big, the prime minister went here and did this, but all of this rebuilding of the trade unions that's happening, all of these demand-based organizations, what the work that some of the resistance committees are doing, the continued occupations of cities, and find ways of supporting them. Thank you.
Thanks, Sara, for this. This has been a great discussion, and I wish we had more time to delve into more details and answer all your great questions. As I said earlier, this is part of a series of webinars to reflect on a decade of struggles in the Arab region. The next one would be in the autumn to launch the Arab Uprising dossier, so do watch out for it. You can also listen to the great series of podcasts that my colleague Sean curates. It's called State of Power and covers various issues to make sense of the world's most complex challenges. We've recorded one recently on the ongoing Algerian Uprising, so do listen to it when you have time. TNI offers these webinars, podcasts, and its research for free. And as you know, it takes time and a lot of resources. So we will be grateful if you can support our work by donating through the link you will see in the chat. Finally, I'd like to thank all our speakers. You've been truly great. Thanks to Miriam, Jess, Maha, Riwan for making this webinar run smoothly. A big thank you goes to our interpreters, Muhammad and Bilal, who definitely did a great job. And finally, thanks to all our audiences for joining us. We will close with a song of hope from Algeria, suggested by Malia, called Donna Victoria. Many Algerian artists in the diaspora, especially those who felt exiled in different ways, have come to support the people's uprising through anthems for the movement. Raja Mazian has been a vital voice that the regime has tried to repress at all costs. Enjoy the song and goodbye.
حر للممات لو كان ما جابوا الحرية عمرها لا جات شم ريحة الأرض تفهم باللي بالدم نسقات جايبين الحرية ما بقاش قد اللي فات الشعب تعب طوال اللعب السوسة زايدة كلانا الهم محب الماستر قرب لا فايدة في قلوبنا نايدة لا بريزون فايدة حرية منوطي والمحاكمة حامضة عدالة مغمضة حالتك يا بلادي مريضة مازالهم يضربوا فيا باش نبقى بعيدة ونعلي الراية البيضة بديتو انتوما علينا ياك الحرب الباردة شبيبة مرمدة لا مافيا مقبضة ضربوك بخوك والخاوة على بعضها حقدة لا فيكتوريا العزيزة راكي طولتي ولاد الحومة قاع يسقسو قدام بنتي لا فيكتوريا العزيزة راكي طولتي ولاد الحومة قاع يسقسو قدام بنتي يما راني من فيا من بنت شراب ليا الحرارة هي تمشي في الدم الحرية C'est mon ADN Révolution dans les gènes, c'est mon ADN Je connais les hommes, les fils de femmes, c'est mon ADN Donna Victoria dans les âmes, c'est mon ADN Les companeros dans la rue, on n'a pas le temps Il y a des fleurs qui vivent et meurent avant le printemps Plus important, nous insistons On vivra comme des rois chez nous, pas comme des moutons Ils nous mentent, ils nous trahissent, les traîtres